Good morning. Today is June 21st, and you are watching Focus on the News with Senator Richard Black. Senator Richard Black, what do you have for us today?
Well, good morning, Morgan. We're gonna talk about really the question of whether Trump's attacking Iran could end up destroying the whole MAGA movement. I'm very concerned. I happen to be a pretty strong Trump supporter and very conservative, and I see a lot of things that I like very much. But at the same time, I was an elected official in Virginia, in both the House and the Senate. And living in Northern Virginia, which tends to be very purple and actually, very Democrat at this point, every election was a battle, a tremendous battle. And often it was my campaign would be the one that got the most reporting around the state. I ran and won 12 hotly contested campaigns over the years, both for the House and for the Senate. And I lost one. So total of 13, I won 12 and I lost one. So why did I lose the one? Well, I was very widely known as having been a colonel and having fought in Vietnam with the Marines, been an Army JAG officer. So it was a very visible military symbol. And, it's just sort of natural to figure, well, he's sort of on board with this or that. When we went to war with Iraq, I was not at all pleased with that war. We had no excuse for it. It was done on a flimsy pretext that somehow there were weapons of mass destruction and little Iraq was going to destroy the world, invade everyone. This usual hogwash that you get. I didn't like it. And that year, this particular election, we had invaded Iraq. There'd been this tremendous slaughter taking place, some American casualties, significant, very, very tiny compared to what we unleashed on Iraq itself, where there may have been 1 to 2 million Iraqis killed in a war that had no logical foundation whatsoever. Totally unprovoked. There was nothing that the Iraqis did to the United States or even to U.S. interests that justified our attack. And so the country turned against the war. They turned against more combat in the Middle East. And the Democrats seized on this, and they created something called Code Pink. And Code Pink was very active, and there was a big anti-war movement. And it was the anti-war movement that cost me the election. There were 5 Republican members of the House of Delegates who all they were reelected by 1% or less. So they just, all of the Republicans in Northern Virginia scraped by the skin of their teeth. And being the most visible military person, even though I was against the Iraq war, I ended up being swept out in that. And we had a good Republican congressman who represented this area. Frank Wolf was his name. And he called me afterwards. He said, he says, I've seen this before. He said, sometimes you get swept up by national politics and there is nothing you can do. And that was exactly the case. Now, that's no different today than it was back then. We are on the verge of possibly attacking Iran. This will be an totally unprovoked attack by the United States. attacking on behalf of a foreign country, Israel, and the idea would be, okay, I'm sure that President Trump has been convinced by the Israeli advisors that this will be quick, it'll be surgical, and it'll be over in no time, and you can declare this monumental victory. Iran is nothing. They're going to collapse like a deck of cards, just like Russia collapsed like a deck of cards in the Ukrainian war. Just like just like Syria was supposed to collapse like a deck of cards, and took us 13 years to finally topple that small country. But anyway, President Trump is convinced. He saw a lot of news reporting about how grand and glorious this Israeli attack was, and how it absolutely destroyed Iran, and they no longer are a force. And here they are 9 days later, and Iranian missiles are hitting and exploding. They're penetrating the impenetrable Iron Dome of Israel. And so the same thing is likely to happen when the United States attacks. We'll have an attack that will probably involve 200-300 American warplanes, supported by perhaps 150 or 200 Israeli planes, maybe 50 British planes. Who knows? I mean, everybody's going to bomb Tehran. There's going to be a huge slaughter. It's going to be wonderful. The media will talk about it as just the grand and glorious thing. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that afterwards, the first thing that Trump is going to hear from the Israelis who advise him is, well, we didn't get all of the nuclear material destroyed. We're going to need some more. If we'll just do this, and then we'll start doing that. And eventually he'll be told, we got a real problem here, because the Iranians may do something desperate to cut off the oil supplies out of the Persian Gulf. We need to have some troops on the ground. We need to put special forces in, and our Special Operations Command tells us that they go in and they can really wipe out this stuff on the, it's just, I've seen this played out. I've been in it. I've been in it in Vietnam. It goes on and on. It's the same playbook. So I just worry that it will not be a quick surgical thing, and that it will drag on, and that the biggest drag will be the drag on the Republican Party, and that we will have a devastating loss in the midterms to a party that right now is essentially bankrupt. I mean, they're bankrupt of ideas, they're bankrupt of money. But I'll tell you what, you better never get arrogant to the point where you count out the opposition, because about the time that they look like they're down for the count, you turn and you raise your hands to declare victory, and they stagger to their feet and they punch you in the back of the head. So watch out, Republicans. Watch out, Donald Trump. The party that you've defeated so soundly, they're just waiting for you to punch yourself in the face and knock yourself down. Mm-hmm. That's what we're on the verge of doing by attacking Iran.
Yeah, I would say that another valid point is during Trump's 2016 run, during the debates, he was calling out the blunder that was the war in Iraq. And to watch this kind of go down, and it's literally a copy and paste of the same thing. We have oh, these weapons, they can't have these weapons of mass destruction. And then you have this posturing by the Republican Party and some of its members like Tom Cotton, um, Tom Tillis, Ted Cruz, that are calling openly for regime change, which is the same playbook that they did in Iraq. As soon as the public wasn't getting enough solidified information that there was weapons of mass destruction, oh, we have to take out Saddam. He's the evil person. Now this is our pivot to reclaim legitimacy into this war. So it's very interesting to see just this repetition of playbook. There isn't really even it's just a shift of a single letter with Iran and Iraq almost. But
That's true. Some people will be mixed up on them because, Americans, what do we know about the Middle East? It's very easy and understandable why Americans would get confused between Iraq and Iran. They have short names that start with I, and they're somewhere over on the other side of the world, either in Asia or maybe Europe, or I don't know. They're probably not South America, but it's somewhere over there. and why don't we kill them? Because after all, we're told that they're coming to get us. Any day they're coming to get us.
Exactly. And that brings me to the point that I wanted to make. And we have alluded to it on this show before, which is the claims of Wesley Clark. Him essentially saying that this is actually a pre-planned attack on these different countries, with the last one being Iran. So let me go ahead and play this video for us.
I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So I wanted to put that forth to the people because I just want people to understand the playbook that's being played here. Every single nation that Wesley Clark had mentioned has been attacked except for Iran. And then in the efforts to do so, there has always been this tactic of othering them, with Libya and with Syria, always these tactics to where Americans feel threatened. So I want to pose this question to you. Iran is often situated as being called the state that sponsors terrorism. I want to ask, is there any evidence that verifies these claims, and to what extent would you say there's truth to those claims?
Well, you hear this all the time, probably several times a day right now. You'll hear it said, Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism on earth. And I've studied the Middle East for many, many years. I've been there. I used to, at one time, in more peaceful times, I was personally responsible for military justice throughout North Africa and all of the Middle East. And I didn't have some staff that did it, and it was just a tiny part of my greater responsibilities, but it was kind of enjoyable back then. I would occasionally deal with the embassy in Egypt or the embassy in Saudi Arabia or somewhere else. And, you know, it was always diplomatically sensitive, which made it very interesting to me. They weren't big criminal issues, but they were things that became very interesting because of all of the ambassadors and the Saudi princes and different people who get involved. But at that time, I could have gone to anywhere in the Middle East, and I could have traveled alone, and I could have driven through Syria, Lebanon, and over to Iraq. I could have gone to Iran. I could have gone to Egypt. I could have even gone to Saudi Arabia without being beheaded back in those days. And everywhere I would have gone, I could have just stopped into a little goat herder's cabin and had tea with them or something. People would have said, "It's wonderful. You're an American. We're so happy to have you here." The last time that I was over there, I had to be guarded by a convoy of heavily armed elite troops, and we dashed through the desert to avoid being attacked by ISIS, which was being supplied by the United States at the time. And you look at any place over there, Americans are in danger almost everywhere in the Middle East that they set foot. So we've gone from a time of great peace, prosperity, happiness, to having imposed a time of utter misery on people. Now, this idea that Iran is the perpetrator of all of this terror, I have a lot of data points in my life, and so I can look back and say, okay, what are they talking about? Because I can't articulate a terrorist event that the Iranians were responsible for. And the one that's most commonly cited was the Beirut Barracks bombing. This occurred in 1983, so 42 years ago, 2 generations ago. The United States had invaded Lebanon. It had landed Marines, and I love Marines. I fought with Marines. I got the flag behind me. Very proud of the Marines. There were 241 Marines who were killed in a suicide bombing attack on the Marine barracks. And this was blamed on Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is a defensive organization that attempts to defend Lebanon, where they live. They're Lebanese, and they attempt to defend it against multiple attacks across the border by Israel, including the one that's being done right now, and including the one where the United States went in to assist Israel with their invasion of Lebanon. So what was going on is Hezbollah, the armed forces, the Shia militia group there, were trying to defend their country against invaders. That's what was going on. And so they launched a surprise attack, and they killed a lot of Marines, 241. President Reagan, in response to that, he didn't double down and say, well, let's go, let's get all of these guys. No, he was a very, very astute guy. And he said, you know, we don't know anything about what we're doing over there. And I'm pulling out. And he pulled out, and he got us clean out of the place. So that's the biggest one, the Beirut Barracks bombing. Iran had no direct involvement. They were supporters of the militia that was defending Lebanon. The other big thing is that Iran has always been an ally of Hezbollah in their defense of Lebanon. And so, again, here's this sort of tenuous thing. There apparently, there was an apparent plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in 2011. Now, keep in mind, in 2011, the Saudi ambassador, well, Saudi Arabia was involved in a huge push to overthrow the legitimate, constitutional, duly elected government of Syria. They were doing this by sending terrorists, Saudi Arabia, and this was record everywhere. It's quite clear. Saudi Arabia was funding ISIS, and they were funding Al-Qaeda in Syria to do a campaign of mass rape, mass beheadings, and mass terror, including crucifixions. They were crucifying people on crosses like Jesus was crucified. They had jihadists who were training little boys, like 8-year-old boys, to cut the heads off of prisoners. And this was done by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was deeply complicit in the attacks on 9/11, on the Twin Towers. Almost all of the people who flew those jets were Saudi Arabians. And so there was apparently a plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador, and that was apparently by someone who was a dual citizen, and Iranian American, and they claimed that he was working with Iranian officials. There was never a bombing; it was never carried out, but apparently there was a plot. And I would have wished him well, and I would have been wishing I could have contributed had that been the case. But in any event, it was. I don't condone it. I wouldn't condone it. I'm just being facetious. But the fact is that if ever an assassination was justified on this planet, it would have been that particular one. Now, I ran this through Chat GPT, and I said it's often said that Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism. Is there evidence to back up that claim? And the response that I got included, principally what I said there. And then they had a conclusion, and this is Chat GPT. Says, in most of the cited incidents, Iranians did not personally carry out killings, but the Iranian state, primarily through the Iranian Republican National Guard Quds force, is believed to have funded, trained, armed, or directed groups that did. This indirect role in sponsoring militant activity is the principal basis for the terrorism sponsor designation. Now, I'll also add that it's interesting that even though the main evidence we have for them being the biggest, baddest terrorists on the planet, even though the principal thing always brought up is the Beirut Barracks bombing 42 years ago, let me see here. I'm losing track. I'm trying to find something here. But in any event, I'm sorry, I got a little distracted there. But in any event, the I recall the United States did not declare that Iran was a sponsor of terrorism until the 90s. I think it was 1997. And the European Union didn't do it until the year 2013. And so you can see that the thing that we look at most commonly as being the thing most cited for terrorism by Iran is old, and we didn't even declare them terrorists at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't, we thought this up later on, because you have to prime the pump for war, and sometimes it takes decades to get people acclimatized to the idea that, you're supposed to hate Iranians. You have to understand, here's some reasons to hate Iranians. We're doing this with China very actively right now. I heard this morning on TV that the Chinese provide a tremendous amount of medicine to the United States, all sorts of antibiotics and various life-saving drugs. And they have the outrageous gall to save the lives of sick Americans. And this endangers us. And this is a reason we're supposed to hate the Chinese, is because they're selling us a disproportionate amount of antibiotics and medicines and that kind of thing. Well, people don't have time to analyze and say, wait a minute, this is a reason we're supposed to hate people, is because they're saving our lives in this country. Now, they didn't say they're saving our lives, but they said they're giving us all these life-saving medications. And that, somehow we're helpless, because if they stop giving us our medicine, what will we do? We've got to attack them. Well, it's just the same irrational baloney that we do over and over.
Yeah, and I'm from North Carolina. So when Hurricane Helene hit, it hit a huge facility that was making the saline bags. It was one of the only facilities in America doing so. They were exporting it all across the country. Well, that facility was hit. And so that resulted in a major shortage of saline bags, which is, you go to a doctor for anything that's, a little more threatening than a cold, they're going to give you a saline bag for, just to sustain yourself. So it was China that picked up the foot of that and actually sent us saline bags during that lapse of, when they were trying to get the facility back up and running. So I remember that, and it's honestly, we do such a disservice to that country that when they continue, they help us, and our leaders continually try and stoke these tensions for war, when we really could have such a amazing relationship with the country of China, and trade and this mixing of technologies and culture. I think it really is such a tragedy that our countries can't come together and coexist on this planet, because
it really is a terrible tragedy. And that that there's one more reason to go to war with China, is that they supplied us the saline solution bags to use in hospitals at a time where we had a shortage and we had a terrible need for it. One more reason that we should attack them. But in any event, so here we are. President Trump, this very strange situation has occurred where we are not even at war with Iran, and we have demanded their unconditional surrender. I think that's never happened in the history of warfare, that you would demand unconditional surrender of somebody you're not at war with. It would probably create some confusion in Iran if they were inclined to surrender to us. But how does one surrender to somebody you're not at war with? So it's quite a bizarre situation. And apparently we are getting very close to launching the attack, perhaps even this weekend.
Yes. backstage, we spoke about this article that Seymour Hersh, for those who don't know Seymour Hersh, he broke the My Lai story, the Nord Stream pipeline. His reporting is always very thorough. He doesn't haphazardly put things out there without, verifying them 10 times. So he put out a new Substack where he has said that he has gotten information from White House aides and informants that he has, that the White House has signed off on a bombing campaign, a direct bombing campaign by the United States in Iran, potentially this weekend. So that's very alarming. And, we started this conversation talking about, is Trump hindering the MAGA movement? And in doing so, we've seen through this events unfolding with Iran, you see America First people who espoused America First, and you have this other faction of people who claim to be MAGA who are pushing for this war. And you're really seeing this huge divide in the Republican Party. I wanted to show this video. It's been very widely circulated of the interview that Tucker Carlson had with Ted Cruz, kind of showing we alluded to it before, the ignorance we have towards Iranians, and yet we still push for this this crazy policy of regime change, even though, the death toll that we saw on American citizens and on Iraqi citizens, and kind of trying to achieve the same thing there. So let me go ahead and play this video for us.
Living around, by the way.
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people living around?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because,
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay, this is cute.
It's not even... You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay,
actually,
I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who claims,
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
They're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that,
we're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here, because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
We are supporting
this is
Israel.
High stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay.
And this kind of adds to your point as well, where you said this is, Trump making that tweet, unconditional surrender. The lines are being very blurred on how involved we are already. So I wanted to get you to comment on that, because it's very concerning if we're just allowing this disregard of our Constitution. We're supposed to have the Congress debate if we should go to war, and if we're just allowing these things to unfold before our eyes and allowing the lines to be blurred, and our elected officials like Ted Cruz to flagrantly say we, where do we go from here? How do we correct this? Or, how in deep are we? This is a very concerning thing to go to war with Iran. They have a strategic relationship with Russia. So this would be another escalation that's kind of a thorn in Russia's side. We are already doing that with our aiding in Ukraine. So I just wanted to get your comment on all those kind of different facets that are being played during this conflict.
Yeah. First of all, we are deeply involved in the attack on Iran. Now, I say we're deeply involved. We're deeply involved. We supply a great deal of intelligence to them, particularly satellite intelligence and so forth. We provide all of the planes that they get come from the United States. All of the bombs they drop come from the United States. The funding for the Israeli military comes from the United States. We pay for the Israeli military. So we're deeply entwined. I don't think that President Trump wanted the war with Iran, but it was one of those things that the backers of Iran, the billionaire globalists, they have insisted on it, and so I think President Trump's been in a box where he has felt that he had no choice. In any event, one thing I wish people understood, and it's never spoken of in the media, even though you can find it if you dig it up in the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of these papers. But Israel is a major nuclear power. It's not a minor power. It is a nuclear superpower, not anywhere in the league of the US and Russia, but it's a big nuclear power. And it's actually come very close to using a nuclear attack on Egypt back during the 73 war, when they actually loaded up nuclear bombs on jets and had them standing on the tarmac ready to take off. So this idea that somehow the existence of Israel is threatened if Iran ever decided to build a nuclear weapon. These are big boys. I mean, they've chosen not to have good relations with their neighbors and instead to attack all of them, and they've attacked in every direction, and they keep enlarging the boundaries of Israel, making it bigger. And these are big boys. They've got a gargantuan supply of nuclear weapons. They have total funding support, total arms support from the United States. And the idea that now we have to get our hands dirty and become directly involved in this Iran wars, it's just a tragedy. Benjamin Netanyahu, for decades and decades, has sought to draw the United States in war. And probably 30 years ago, he was saying that any time now, very soon, the Iranians will build a nuclear bomb. And then a decade goes by, he says, any day now, they're going to build a bomb. And another decade, any day now, they're going to build a bomb. Now, he's become so aggressive with the entire Middle East, and particularly with Iran, to where, as you mentioned, Wesley Clark, this goes back to 2001. We planned the U.S. Sort of military enterprise within our government, CIA, Pentagon, and so forth, made plans to topple 7 Arab countries, mostly Arab countries, and to do it within 5 years. 5 years reflects the optimism of the war makers. It's easier to sell the product if you can say, oh, this will be in and out, it'd be no big deal. And here we are, all these, quarter of a century later, and we're still working our way up to topple the last country, a country of 90,000 highly civilized, highly intelligent individuals who, incidentally, of all of the people in the Middle East, the Iranians are the most pro-American, or at least they were before they were attacked.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I read Cliff Kirikoff's book on Christian Zionism. There's a big portion of the book where he talks about the history between the United States and Middle Eastern countries. One of the most interesting and yet beautiful facts was that the first country to ever recognize the American flag after they split with the British was Morocco. The first country to ever recognize the Americans and actually commit trade was an Arab nation. And that started a very prosperous trade connection between the United States and the Middle East at that moment. And it wasn't until we started conducting these regime change operations, the Operation Cyclone, where we uplifted Al-Qaeda back in the 80s, that this real shift happened from being, an ally and someone that we could trade with and switch cultures and have a high value relationship to this very palpable disdain that both sides have, of Middle Eastern countries probably have towards Americans, and that, American citizens are told to have on the same Middle Eastern countries. So I found that to be very, very interesting. And that kind of goes to your point as well. So I just wanted to make a note of that, because I found that always rings through my head when these conversations happen, where it's like, find that to be a beautiful fact. Morocco was the first country out of all the countries to recognize American for its independence.
Interesting. Well, now I would like to add this. I am told from individuals who have connections within Iran that I've asked what's the reaction, and among people, there are many in Iran who, they did not like the form of government that they had. Didn't mean they were revolutionaries, but it's just like the Democrats in this party. They don't like the government we have today. They don't like the Republican government. That doesn't mean they're revolutionaries, although a handful of them may be. But for the most part, Democrats just, they just don't agree with what's going on. Okay. So it's that way with Iran. There are a lot of Iranians who don't like the government that's in power, and but what I'm told is that with these attacks by Iran, the entire Iranian country has pulled together, and at this point, it doesn't matter whether you like the Ayatollahs or the Republican Guard, or you like the president or the former president. Everybody today is an Iranian. And so they are pulling together, they are toughening up, and the terrain in Iran is very, very difficult. It's very mountainous. And so if the Iranians are fired up as they are now by an unprovoked attack. You remember what happened with us in Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor wasn't part of the United States, but the American fleet was attacked there in one of our territories, and it just rallied Americans, even people who were America first, who were against the war in Europe and Asia. All of a sudden, there was this coming together. Well, that's the way people react to an unprovoked attack. And the Americans thought of this as an unprovoked attack. And the Iranians certainly see this as an unprovoked attack on them. And then to have us demand that they evacuate Tehran, which is a city of 10 million people, and that 10 million people abandon their homes, their businesses, their families, their jobs, and go out and presumably just live in the woods and subsist off of berries and nuts. It ain't going to happen. I mean, that's just not going to happen. You cannot order cities of 10 million people to leave. Now, the Israelis do it all the time in Gaza, and it's almost become a game to say, okay, well, you have to leave and go over to this place or you'll be unsafe. And then as soon as the old people and children and all drag themselves miles and miles to the safe place. Then the Israelis bomb them, kill them, and then tell them, you've got to go to another place. And they chase them from place to place. It's almost a kind of a hideous game that's being played.
Yes, that's a very great point to also bring up. Through all this chaos between Israel and Iran, they're still bombing Gaza. You know, there are hundreds of people are dying a day there, and I feel like it's a huge tragedy, and the shielding the eyes of Americans from what's happening over there through this chaos that's happened in Iran. So I'm glad that we were able to bring that up.
That's an excellent point, Morgan. I am sure that one of the factors in the Israeli determination to attack Iran is that they are in the process of exterminating the Palestinian population. Their desire, they would be very happy to simply drive them out, as they have driven out generations and generations of indigenous Palestinians from their lands. But in this case, they've just decided, okay, the other surrounding countries are not going to accept more Palestinian refugees from us, so they must be killed. And there seems to be a very concerted effort on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu to conduct this war on Gaza in such a way that the population of Gaza is reduced or totally eliminated. And this obviously is a monumental war crime. And the idea that you can go back to this original conflict where Hamas launched an attack against the Israeli settlements right on the border. And I think at that point, I think most people, including myself, said, well, okay, some act of reprisal is warranted. And, and I was quite happy to hang in there with the Israelis for a little while. But you can only do this to a certain extent. And I'd say at this point, the Israelis have probably killed 100 Palestinians for every Israeli who was killed. And so it is an embarrassment. It's a political embarrassment for Netanyahu, for people to be focused on this constant, incessant slaughtering of principally just women and children, cutting them off from water, cutting them off from food, quite deliberately destroying every hospital in the entire Gaza Strip, every medical clinic, every museum, every school, all of the housing that supports them out in the desert, and just leaving people with no way to feed, no way to give water to their children, and just leaving them to die and their bodies to be infested with maggots out in the desert. It's an embarrassment to the United States and to Israel. And the idea of having a big flashbang, glorious campaign in another country that draws everybody's attention is very tempting. And I'm sure there are, all of the Israeli planners, whether they spoke this fact, they knew in the back of their minds this would relieve some of the pressure, because the United States is pretty much the only country that truly condoned everything that was going on in the Gaza, and also just the unilateral decision to attack the West Bank, which is part of Israel itself, and to allow the settlers a free hand to start slaughtering people in the West Bank. It's a hideous war against the Palestinians, and the Palestinians were the original inhabitants. They lived in great harmony with the Jews. They actually had a coin in Palestine. It was a Palestinian coin, and it had 3 interlocking rings, and they represented the 3 big religious populations in Palestine. So you had the Muslims, you had the Christians, you had the Jews, and all of them were in large percentages. I think probably the Muslim population was first, but the Jewish population was big. It was not just some small fraction, and likewise the Christians. And the Christians, they may have been 20% of all of the population. Now they're only 1%. How did that happen? Nobody ever bothers to ask. But many of the Palestinians who were driven out were Christians. They weren't just Muslims, but they were Christians also. So there's a very dark history there, and countries have bad things that happen in their past, and they have to move forward. But I don't think Israel is moving forward. I think Israel is just continuing this never-ending campaign, and I think it is prompted by Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he's been a very poisonous, very venomous influence on Israel. He's brought out the worst. He's elevated the worst elements of Israeli society to embark on this incredible campaign of violence against the neighbors.
Yes, it does tug at my heartstrings, the injustice that continues to happen, and in my government's role in supplying these weapons. I spoke with Dr. Mark Perlmutter. I think you had the opportunity to listen to him speak one time. And he says when he was there, he went to Gaza twice. He was operating on a child and would pull a bullet that said "Made in Philadelphia." And it would just fill him with so much shame and righteous anger towards the fact that this is happening. So I'm glad that we dedicated some time to call attention to this and express our condemning of these actions. So I think that we will conclude it there, unless you would like to have some ending remarks, Senator.
Yeah, let me just end it. I spoke to someone recently who was in a conversation with his parents, his mother and father, who are Iranian Americans living in Tehran. And as he was talking with his mother, she suddenly screamed and the phone went dead. And he told me that several days later, he was able to reconnect. And what had happened is that while he was speaking to his mother, the Israelis bombed the building directly across from theirs. The blast from the bomb burst their windows, and she was cut all over her face and her arms by flying glass. His father was thrown against the wall, and his ribs were broken by the impact. They both lived. But the building across the way, there were 60 inhabitants of the building. Everyone was killed, including 40 children. So this is a little snapshot of what's going on and the reality of the war. Wars are not pretty. They're not just whiz-bang planes flying through the air. They're little boys and little girls lying on the ground with their flesh ripped off, shivering and shaking as they moan and cry out for help, and they lay there and die. This is the reality of war. I've seen it. I've been involved in it. I've dragged the bloody bodies for evacuation. I don't have a great affection for all of these hobby wars that we embark on with no legitimate reason whatsoever, no attack on the United States, and all of a sudden we're out killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And I think it's time we stopped. Don't you, Morgan?
I agree. It's just such an unnecessary loss of life, and hopefully we can, through these dialogues, we can try and find, more movement in the anti-war field. So I want to thank you all for listening to us today, and join us next week to focus on the news.
Thank you.